Hi everyone, happy week 5. I hope you're all doing well. The semester is going by so fast, and this week we're going to be moving into assessing play. Specifically in this lecture, we're going to be talking about types of play, and then in the following 2 lectures, we're going to be going over observing play and evaluating play. I'm going to be uploading your evaluating play lecture midway through the week so that you have time to review it before your first exam. So I'll be putting out reminders about your first exam and your discussion post 3, and just in general every week announcing what's due to help you to stay on track. I just want to say thank you to everyone for your participation in the discussion posts, commenting on your peers with thoughtful feedback. I'm also going to be providing you with feedback on your project ideas, so give me a little bit of time to look those over. That way it can help you to stay on the right track, and in case you need some tweaking or just help with your suggestions, I'll be able to do that for you. In regard to your first exam, please make sure that you plan out enough time to complete the exam in one sitting. You will have only an hour to complete it, and it does consist of multiple choice questions and short answer questions. So you'll have 20 multiple choice questions, and you'll have 4 to 5 short answer questions. Again, I'll be posting more details about that later this week so that you have that in your announcements. Late exams will not be accepted, and then anybody who has testing accommodations, you'll see those reflected once you start the exam. As always, please reach out to me if you have questions related to any assignments, exams ahead of time. That way we can get everybody on the same page. And then I think that's all I have for announcements, and I hope you enjoyed today's lecture on types of play. Alrighty folks, so let's jump right in and talk about social play. So Mildred Parton describes different types of play, and we see this at different ages and different stages in children's development, and having an understanding of the complexity of the following types of social play will help us to better understand where children are at once they start to engage with objects, they engage in dramatic play and physical play with others. So play with adults is mentioned first in your text, but this one's pretty self-explanatory, and we're going to focus instead on the social play with others, so children playing with their peers for our lecture today. So we're first going to talk about solitary play, and although solitary play is when children are playing by themselves, they are, however, glancing at other children while they're playing. They're interested in others' actions, but they don't yet have the social and communication skills to be able to interact with others and coordinate movements or behaviors of play. And this type of play will continue even as children are advancing to higher forms such as parallel and cooperative play. You'll still see children who are playing by themselves in solitary play, as well as engaging in cooperative play, and it's just as important for children to have time to interact and play alone and learn vital skills of independence, persistence, and focus during their play. And your text doesn't discuss the other 2 forms of Parton's types of play, unoccupied and onlooker, but I wanted to just briefly bring them up because you might have heard of them. So onlooker play is a type of play where it's an extension of solitary play almost, and children are not engaged with others, but they're watching and observing. So they're engaging in that watching and observing, but they're not playing. They're just there and watching others. So they're not playing themselves. They're just there observing, people watching. And then unoccupied play is when children are using objects, but they're not playing with them in the sense of using them for play. It might just be unorganized usage, and we'll kind of talk about this a little bit later when we get to sensory motor play and exploration, so stay tuned for that. So let's move on. So now we're going to talk about parallel play, and you'll see here that I have an additional aspect, parallel aware play. So your text, the way that they describe social play, goes solitary play, parallel play, and parallel aware play. Solitary play, parallel play, associative play, and cooperative play. And we're going to add in, to provide an extension of children's play, parallel aware play. So I want you to think of it as solitary play, parallel play, we're changing associative play to be parallel aware play, and then we're going to split up cooperative play to be both associative and cooperative. So we're going to make cooperative play a beginning level, which is the associative play, and then a later level or final level, which is your cooperative play. So let me explain some examples of what this might look like. So we already looked at solitary play. Now let's talk about parallel play. So this is when children start to play near each other and they're engaging in the same activity, but they're not playing together, or they're uninvolved with one another, but they're still there. They're still both playing. So imagine they're playing with the same thing, maybe at the Play-Doh table or in the block area. They're both playing with the same objects and they're near each other, but they're not playing together. And then parallel aware play is once children start to become more aware, we see them interacting a bit more. So during parallel aware play, which we're swapping for associative play, children are starting to children are starting to develop more active exchanges with one another during their play, but they're not quite fully interacting in the sense that they're developing ideas or they're cooperating during their play. So for example, maybe you're doing a Play-Doh activity with children, and you're all sitting at the table together and everybody's playing with the same materials and everybody's working on their own creations individually. So we're playing parallel, but we're aware of each other, right? So I may look over at a peer. Imagine I'm a child. I may look over at a peer and notice that they are rolling a ball. So my friend is saying, I'm making a ball. And then I switch from flattening my Play-Doh because I noticed my peer who was rolling a ball, and I stop what I'm doing flattening and I say, ooh, I'm going to make a ball too. And then I copy what my peer is doing and I start rolling a ball. So I'm playing next to my peer in the parallel sense, but I'm aware of what they're doing and we're exchanging ideas without having to communicate or interact in a cooperative sense with one another. But there's conversations and intentional interactions that are not quite developed, but they're in that in-between state, and there's that awareness, as I was mentioning. Now we're going to take cooperative play and break it off. So we're moving the term associative play, and we're putting that at the beginning of cooperative play. So that's our start of cooperative play. And once children have gained skills in being able to communicate with one another, they start to exchange ideas back and forth. And so this is a step up, and children are starting to engage in turn taking, and they're aware of my turn versus someone else's turn. So in this first idea of associative play, which is that beginning level of cooperative play, children might roll a ball back and forth saying, yay, me. And then when the ball goes to the next person, they say, now me. And it's an exchange of back and forth interactions, but there's not a lot of ideas being produced. There's not adding on to the play. They're not coordinating what they're going to be doing during that time. It's simple interactions, that basic level of playing with another person. And then when we're in the final stage, so the cooperative play, that's our highest level of social play with another person. So they're engaging in the same activity with one another, but they're making decisions about what they want to do. They're figuring out how to do it together, and there's more advanced notions all around. So an example, imagine you have 3 children, you're outside, and they're all climbing on a climbing structure. And they might agree upon a game that they're going to play on the climbing structure. And the climbing structure is a mountain. And each of the 3 friends are going to take a turn getting to the top of the mountain. And as they climb to the top, they shout, we made it! We're at the top of the mountain! And then they each, one by one, climb down in, sequential order as they've listed who's going to go first, second, and third. And they then go off to find a stream to cool off in and go swimming. So this is a much more advanced level of I'm cooperating with another person or a small group of people, and we're making decisions and we're assigning roles. So there's higher levels of our social interaction. And each type of play, as children get older and they're more advanced in their ability to communicate and share ideas with one another, it segues into each type of play. And on the next slide, we're going to talk about physical play, and then we'll get into object play and dramatic play. Okay, so I thought it would be fun and important to add in a play that's not described in your text, physical play. So this is important in children's play. There are 4 different types of physical play: roughhousing, unstructured physical play, structured physical play, and sports. And children engaging in physical play are learning a lot of valuable skills on how to interact with others, as well as learn about their own bodies. So if you think back to last week, we watched a video on rough and tumble play, and the key takeaway from that related to today's lecture is that children, excuse me, were learning how to communicate their needs. They were understanding their awareness of their own bodies as well as their peers' bodies during play, and they were tuning into the social cues and rules during that type of play. And it's common for children to want to engage in roughhousing, which is also known as rough and tumble play. And during this type of physical play, children are engaging in cooperation with one another. So there are a lot of social exchanges happening back and forth during physical play. And most likely physical play is happening with another person. Especially if you're engaging in roughhousing, you're going to be seeing children do that with one another. And in terms of a safe way for children to release their aggression, physical play is that outlet for them. It's fun for them, and it allows them to act out and role play and figure out their emotional needs, their emotional regulation, and have their physical needs met. So there's so much related to physical play that is beneficial for children aside just interacting with another person and communication. A lot more is happening. And it's important to remember during physical play that we want children to have enough space to move freely. As we know, play with enough space allows children the opportunity to engage in a variety of different ways. And if we want children to explore their bodies and be aware of their surroundings, they need proper space in order to do that. And of course, having the presence of an adult during physical play, just like other forms of play where children are engaging socially, such as dramatic play, which we'll touch on later, it creates a support system for children in order for them to learn proper skills of communication and just play skills in general. And that was another takeaway from the video, that the adult was discussing the rules and how the game of rough and tumble was going to be played and what the expectations were. And physical play can also be a time where children are using objects and, like I mentioned just a minute ago, games with rules. So oftentimes you see physical play associated with games with rules, such as during sports. So a lot of these physical play points right here are interconnected. So it's funny, I think about when I'm looking at physical play, the phrase that I heard a lot when I was a kid: it's all fun and games until someone gets hurt. But, just jokes here. But it kind of does make you think about, physical play with kids is important, and also the notion of physical play. Somebody could get hurt, so how do we help children to build skills in order to communicate with one another? And when emotions are heightened, how do we put that into a play setting, and what's play, and when children might need space? So other things to just think about. We're not going to get into that in too much detail, but just other things to think about with physical play and just play in general. Many big emotions might come about when children are playing, and you may observe that, which we're going to talk about in the next lecture, of what behaviors you might be seeing during children's play and what that looks like, and different emotions they feel during different types of play and the degrees of their behavior. And also with physical play, the last 2 things we want to look at are having both unstructured and structured physical play. And this creates a balance in children's decision making and their free time to create the types of play that they want to. So remember, we want play to be open-ended, non-literal, and also a free choice activity. So that unstructured time gives children that choice and allows them to choose their interest. Of course, structured play can include activities that children might do during unstructured time, but they're prompted and set in place by adults. For example, an adult may combine a child's interests, sports, and or games with rules to make physical play more enticing, and it helps create spaces for children to enhance their skills in gross motor development set in place by the adult. And then during unstructured physical play, children may use this time to engage in a variety of different things. So like the picture here, they might want to play a game with a peer, such as a sporting like basketball, or maybe want to ride their bike or run and play tag. So various ways that children can engage in unstructured physical play time. And the benefits of unstructured play contribute to so many different things. Children can practice problem solving, make their own decisions, as I mentioned, construct their own ideas, and just explore areas that they find interesting on their own. And unstructured play is also strongly linked to children's time spent outdoors. So many research has noted, including the National Institute for Health, how when children have play opportunities outside in nature, there's a positive impact on the quality of their physical, cognitive, and dramatic play. And we're going to talk much more later on in the semester about the importance of nature and how play and nature go together. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so now that we have a solid understanding, hopefully, of the different types of social play and a little bit about physical play, we're going to talk about object play. And object play is exactly how it sounds. It's when children are playing with objects or playing with an object. However, the way children play with objects, it looks a little bit different depending on their age and their intentions behind the way that they're using objects. So first, we're going to look at sensory motor. And sensory motor object play is the earliest stage of object play, and this is when children are exploring objects using one of their many senses or exploring the motor abilities of their bodies or the functions of objects. So we see sensory motor play early on with young infants as they shake a rattle, and this type of play not only allows children to explore their senses, but like I said, see how objects function. So what happens when I shake a rattle and then, ooh, it makes a ding ding sound. And then, what happens if I tap the rattle on, the floor or my high chair? It makes a ding bang sound. And children are able to experiment with the functions of objects and how their bodies can manipulate objects in a variety of different ways. And so we see sensory motor in a few different ways. So this is functions with objects, functions with no objects, functional passive, and then functional active. So first, let's talk about functional with no objects. So this would be considered when a child is just using their body as the object. So a child might wave their arms up and down, or they're spinning around in a circle, and they're not using objects, but they're using their bodies as the objects and exploring their sensory motor abilities with their bodies. And then a functional passive child may be watching as their caregiver waves a feather back and forth and then grabs the feather and puts it in their mouth, or they reach over to an object and grab it, and that's when they're shaking the rattle or tapping. So they're using objects, but really they're using objects to explore the function of the object. So how does it sound? What does it smell like? Different ways that they can explore using their senses. And then we might have a child who is functional passive. So this might be when a child is mouthing a block, or maybe they're just carrying a ball around, but they're not actually using it for anything. They're just holding on to the ball. We see a lot of times kids put things in their pockets, or they hold things, or they are doing something and holding an object and it's just there. So they're passively engaging with objects but not actually using them in any intentional way. And then a functional active child they're using objects in an intentional way. So they're grabbing things, they're putting things in their mouth, they are exploring the motions of an object, they're using their motor skills and their sensory skills to act on objects. Oops, okay, so I got cut off there, but I was talking and finishing up sensory motor, and now I'm moving on to constructive. So during constructive object play, children are using objects to create, build, and basically just construct their ideas in different forms from the original object itself. So for example, a child might be stacking blocks to build a tall tower or a house. You see here that two children are using boxes and they're creating some form of play where they can use the boxes to communicate with one another in separate spaces. They have their made telephones for them, so they're constructing out of the loose materials that they have around them. Or earlier we were talking about two children who are rolling balls of Play-Doh, so they're creating a new shape with their Play-Doh. And then next we have games with rules. So games with rules are played at various ages in different levels and complexities. So when we think about peekaboo, it's one of the most commonly played games from early on as children are born, and the contents of the game can increase as children have a more complex understanding of the rules. Many games with rules are simplified for younger children in order for them to be able to participate. So, I mean, one thing I think about is, have you ever played hide and seek with, a 1 or newly 2-year-old? And if not, you're definitely going to need to be okay with having them follow you to your hiding spot, or, peeking as they are the seeker and finding out where you're going as you're hiding. But then as they get older, this same game of hide and seek might have more complex rules to it. So children might have a better understanding of the step-by-step process of the hider and the seeker and what their roles are in the game, and may create their own rules within the game, and they have patience and more persistence and problem-solving skills that have increased. So a preschool or early school ager might want to implement their own rules in the game and suggest that you have to count all the way to 100, or, if you peek, you have to start over again, and implement those rules within that initial game of hide and seek. Whereas when we played hide and seek with a younger child, we had a very different set of rules, and they were a little bit more loose in the rules. And then last but not least, we have dramatic play, and dramatic play is a type of play that requires children to be able to represent objects, also known as symbolic representation. And it also requires children to engage in role-playing. So we see from theorists Piaget and Vygotsky how they describe symbolic play, and this is the child's ability to use their imagination to represent one object from another. So this means a child is going to be able to pretend. So such as a 2-year-old, they might be picking up a play phone and saying, "Hello, Mom," and then putting the phone down. And then with role-playing, children are using their imagination, an extension of their representation skills, in order to transform objects and themselves into pretend scenarios of the world. So getting into that fantasy element and that non-literal aspect of what play looks like. So for example, a child might grab a coat and grab a bag and say, "Bye, I'm off to the store and I'm going to go buy groceries." And then they walk over to, the kitchen play area and start grabbing some food items, putting them in their bag. And children are able to use, during dramatic play, complex language and actions to be able to tell a story and reenact different scenes that they might be, seeing in their day-to-day lives. And then on the next slides, we're going to be diving into dramatic play with objects and dramatic play with peers. Okay, so now we're going to talk about dramatic play with objects. And dramatic play with objects can be done in various ways. So thinking about children's development of object permanence helps us to better understand the growth of dramatic play and how it starts to evolve over time. So just a reminder, object permanence is when children are able to recognize that objects still exist outside of their realm of sight, and object permanence fuels language knowledge of certain objects, and this language use is one of the foundations for dramatic play and helps children to be able to dictate what an object is. So knowing that that teddy bear is still under the blanket even when it's covered up is an essential part of developing language and then being able to use that language in dramatic play with objects. So during dramatic play, children may use realistic objects, such as the example on the previous slide when the child was picking up the play phone and using it like a real phone. And having props set in place in a child's play space can really jumpstart early use of representation of objects during dramatic play. And then next, children may also participate in object substitution, where they're using one object to represent another object, but they're not the same object. So thinking about our example of the phone again, instead of using a play phone, a child could instead use a banana or a block as a phone. And then imagery of objects and beings requires children to have more advanced representational skills in order to pretend something or someone is there when they're actually not. So maybe you have a child who grabs a blanket and then they start to pull it along the floor, and then you hear them saying, "Come on, let's go." And then in a pause, you hear woof woof, and they're pretending to walk their dog even though there's not a dog there or an object to represent the dog during their play. And then lastly, we have children as active agents in dramatic play. And this is essentially them creating life with inanimate objects. So they're pretending that objects are real. So they're pretending that their baby doll can cry, and they're pretending that their teddy bear is coughing or has a tummy ache. So they're bringing the objects in their space to life, and it really helps to set the scene and for children to be able to tell a story in using their objects and truly use their imagination to run their play. Okay, so last but not least, we're going to talk about dramatic play with peers, or socio-dramatic play. And this play is a combination of cooperative play skills, social play with others, and dramatic play skills, object play. And you put them together and you have socio-dramatic play. And this is one of the highest forms of play due to the complexity of skills that children need to combine in order to effectively participate with one another. So first we have pre-pretense, and this is dramatic play, but not really. It's kind of a small glimpse, those beginning steps that you might see maybe a 1-year-old doing. So for example, maybe you watch and observe a child put their head on a pillow, and you know that they're pretending to play, but they don't say anything, and then they quickly get up and go and grab a book. So you notice that they're starting to engage in ideas of dramatic play, but they're for quick minutes or glimpses into their day. So maybe they grab a bottle and put it up to the baby's lips and make a sucking motion, and then put it down and, go do something else. So again, pre-pretense. So that beginning stage of, we're starting to observe and model and mimic what others are doing and understand how to use objects in the smallest way. And then we have self-pretend. So this is when children are taking things that are happening in their personal experience and they're using it on their own in their solitary play. So they are using a baby doll and giving it a diaper change. They're feeding the baby. They're getting the baby doll dressed. They're laying the baby down and patting the baby doll and saying shh, shh, shh. And, maybe all this happens in one small observation. You observe all this happening related to the baby doll and all the tools that you need to play with the baby doll, and you watch the child doing it on their own. And then We have other pretend, which is reenacting things that a child might see in their day-to-day lives that don't happen to them. So we often see children pretending that they're going to go to work and pretending that they're going to go to the store. And they might not necessarily do all these things on a day-to-day themselves, or they might, hear or observe from, media or, watch from other adults, but it's not necessarily something that's happening in their day-to-day lives. It's happening to others. And then we have story sequence. So this is when you can start to see that pretend play really unfold and the step-by-step process come through. So it's a thread of play and it has flow to it. So thinking about a child who's going to be going to work or, getting food ready for the baby. It's not just grabbing, the bottle and feeding the baby, or, grabbing the bag and walking around the classroom saying, going to work. It's I'm grabbing my keys and then I'm taking my keys and putting them in my purse, and then I'm walking to another area and I'm sitting down and I'm pretending to get in my car, and then I'm putting my keys into my car and I'm turning the keys in the car and I'm saying vroom vroom and beep beep, and then I get out of the car and then I pretend that I'm at work. So it's a whole step-by-step process and story sequence. I'm telling a story through my play, and there's a step-by-step process. And then finally is the planning. So this is active engagement with children. So this is really where we see the cooperation unfold. We see children are assigning roles to one another. So, okay, I'm going to be the chef and you're going to be the baker. We might have, a story going on behind the picture here in the play, and it looks like they're taking notes. Maybe they're taking orders. One of them is the chef and the other is the delivery person. So they're assigning roles, they're actively engaging and sharing ideas and playing with one another in a cooperative way. So that is all I have for you for today with types of play. So please make sure that you take a peek at everything, and then in the next lectures we're going to be talking about observing and evaluating play.